I know how much you love them, but we're going to be starting fractions, and so we're basically going to start by simplifying fractions, but they're not just the basic fractions that we've been looking at, like 3/4, 1/4. They're going to be algebra fractions. So you can see here in 1 and 2, they start having variables in them, right? And so what I want to do is I want to show you two things: how to simplify these types of fractions, and then by chance they might ask you to find the restriction for some of these, and I've given you some steps to do that too. So basically, to simplify fractions, the first thing you want to do is you've got to factor the numerator and denominator of the fractions. So again, you guys got to be really, really strong with your factoring, because you'll need to be able to factor quickly and correctly to be able to get these answers right. Then what you want to do is, once you've factored, you want to look at the top and bottom and cross things out that look exactly the same. So I've given you this little note right here in the parenthesis to remind you that you have to cross things out in a top and bottom combination. So if you have two things that are on the top of a fraction that look exactly the same, they don't cancel out. It has to be top bottom combinations, not top top or bottom bottom, okay? And then all you do is, once you've canceled everything out, write all the remaining things as a new fraction, okay? If by chance they might ask you to find a restriction, all you have to do is just look at the denominator and you set it equal to 0 and solve. Basically, the point of finding a restriction is because we have this royal rule when we're doing fractions, that you cannot have a 0 on the bottom of a fraction. So a restriction is basically having you look at what number would the variable have to be for it to give us 0, because we want to know right from the get-go what we don't want to have as a final answer, because that's going to give us 0. So we want to look at those numbers too that we might have to plug in to the denominator that we don't want to have, because it's going to give us 0 on the bottom, and we're going to be creating the fraction sin of all time. Okay, but let's take this step by step. Let's go and work on some examples together, and let's see how it goes. So I've given you a few problems here. First set, simplify and give any restrictions. Okay, so let's do the simplifying first, and let's work on number 1. So first step I give you to simplify is to factor out the top and the bottom. So looking at this, I'm going to tell you there's a GCF you can pull out from the top, which is 2. Okay. And then what I have here is on the bottom, also GCF, I could pull out a 5, right? So looking at the top and the bottom, let me change this color here. Looking at the top and the bottom, I have both, they have a t plus 3, right? So I can cross those guys out. And so all I'm left with is 2 over 5. And so our simplification for this is 2 over 5. And if I ask you to find the restriction, basically, since our final answer, you want to find the restriction from the original denominator, okay? So to find the restriction, you're going to go to the original denominator, which was this guy. So what I'm doing now is finding the restriction. That's something I should have told you. Okay, so to find the restriction, go to the original denominator. And all you're going to do, like I said, is take that denominator and set it equal to 0, and then solve. So I'm solving for that t. So t wants to stay at home. So if that helps you, draw a box around t. Okay, divide by 5. So my t equals 3, or -3, I mean. Okay, so all I would have to do here is simplify is the 2 over 5. That's the answer for the simplify part. And then to find the answer for the restriction, you just write restriction and then tell me that it was -3, and that will take care of that part of the problem, okay? Let's go ahead and try number 2. Same idea, we're going to solve. Okay, so the top, I can pull out a GCF of 2. And on the bottom, I can factor this difference of 2 squares. T plus 1, t minus 1. Cancel out the things that they have in common. They both have a t plus 1 in common. So what do I have left over? I have a 2 over t minus 1. So that's what my final simplification is. Okay, so I box that. To find the restriction, go to the original denominator, and then all you do is solve it. So t squared minus 1 equals 0. Remember, to solve this, what we would do is we could factor this t minus 1, t plus 1. Okay, and then to solve this, what would we do? We go t minus 1 equals 0, t plus 1 equals 0, and so we get add 1, t equals 1, minus 1, minus 1, t equals negative 1. So I have my 2 over t minus 1 as the simplifying part, and then I write restrictions, and my answers for that is 1 and negative 1. Okay, so 2 answers for these. Don't forget the fraction after you simplify it, and then the restrictions. So if you guys are not feeling good about your factoring, you gotta practice it. Let's work together with it, because if you can't factor, we're gonna be in trouble for the rest of the year. So we gotta practice our factoring if we can, okay? So let's go ahead and work on this number 3. I changed it up, gave you the box trick for this one. And so we're going to have to use the box trick for both of them. So let's work on the top first. So for 3 and 2, luckily they're both prime, so there's not much options we could have. So I have 3 and 1, and then we're subtracting to get 5. So let's try 1 and 2 maybe. So 3 times 2 is 6. 1 times 1 is 1, and so we got lucky, got it on the first try. Again, we're subtracting to get 5 because this back sign where my cursor is minus, and then this plus just tells me the biggest product is going to get that sign. So is 3 times 2 bigger, or 1 times 1? 3 times 2 is bigger, so that one gets the plus, this one gets the minus, and then remember you group them going across, okay? Now let's look at this here, okay? For this top line, the x squared is in the front, so that tells me that my front numbers are the ones that are going to get the x's, okay? So the way I would write this top line out is 3x minus 1, x plus 2, okay? But when I get here to the bottom ones, see how the x squared is on the bottom? So, or the x squared is in the back. I'll show you how that works. So let's work on this though. So 6, let's go 3 and 2 maybe, and then for 1 we can go 1 and 1. Back sign is minus, so again I'm subtracting to get the middle number. 3, 2. If I subtract, I get 1, so I'm good to go. The plus, biggest product gets the plus, so is 3 times 1 bigger, or 2 times 1? 3 times 1 is bigger, so you follow the arrow, and it gets the plus. Okay, and then you go, and this one has to get the minus. You group them going across. And so once you've grouped them, now look at where the x squared is. The x squared is in the back, so that tells me that my back stuff is going to get the x. So I'm going to have 3 minus x, and then 2 plus x. Okay, now let's rewrite these so that they look a little bit more the same. So this bottom line got a little confusing since they had the x squared in the back. That means our x's went in the back on the bottom line. So let's write them so that the x's are in the front. So the top line was okay, we don't have to change anything, so I'm just rewriting the top line. But the bottom line, instead of 3 minus x, let's call it negative x plus 3. So I'm preserving the sign. The negative is with that x, so I keep the sign, and then call this positive x plus 2. Okay, so what can cancel out? These x plus 2's can go away for sure, and what I'm left with is 3x minus 1 over negative x plus 3. Okay, and so what we could do here is we don't like having this negative x plus 3 out there, so what we would like to do is we pull this negative out, so the top part's okay, But for the bottom one, I don't like having negative x plus 3, so what we do is we pull a negative out and we put it in the middle, and what that does is it changes all the signs to everything on the bottom, and that's just a way to write it a little nicer. Okay, so final answer for this is 3x minus 1, x minus 3 with a negative in the front. Okay, again, this negative in the front just came because we don't like having that negative x plus 3, so we pull it out and put it in the middle, and once we do that, we have to change all the signs on the bottom. To find the restrictions, all we do, you guys, is we go to the bottom of our denominator when we factored it. So this guy right here, let's work that out right here, our restrictions. So I have a 3 minus x, and then I have a 2 plus x, and then we just solve for each of them. So 3 minus x equals 0, 2 plus x equals 0, and then solve. So subtract 3, subtract 3. I don't want to know what a negative x is, I want to know what a positive x is. So I divide by negative 1 and get 3. This one, subtract 2, subtract 2. X equals negative 2. So my restrictions are 3 and negative 2. So last problem I want to work on, again another box trick, and again another one where the x squared is the second is on the back, and so it's very similar to number 3 that we just did. So let's box trick the top. Again, 2 and 3 are good ones because they're prime already. So on the top I have a minus sign in the back, so I'm subtracting to get the middle number. It's not 3 and 2, 3 and 1. Okay, so 2 times 1 is 2. 3 times 1 is 3. If I subtract those guys, I get 1 for sure. So is 1 times 3 bigger or 2 times 1? 1 times 3, so that guy gets the plus. This one gets the minus. The x squared is in the front, so it's going to be the front numbers get the x's. So I get 2x plus 3, x minus 1. So here's how that top line is going to factor out too. Okay. Bottom line is the weird one. Here we go, 2 and 1, and then remember I have a mystery 1 in front of that x squared. 1 and 1. 2 times 1 is 2. 1 times 1 is 1. I'm subtracting to get the middle number because the second sign is minus. So I do get 1 for sure. And this time I change it up because the first sign is a minus. So the bigger product's going to get a minus this sign. So is 2 times 1 bigger or 1 times 1? 2 times 1 is bigger, so that guy gets the minus, this guy gets the plus, and then the x squared's in at the very end, so that means my x's have to go on the very end when I group them. So it's going to look like this. Okay, so on the bottom I have 2 plus x, and then I have 1 minus x. Okay, and so again, I don't like how these guys are kind of with the x second, so let's rewrite this so the top line stays the same. And then for the bottom line, all I do is I rewrite it. I rewrite them with the x's going first. Okay, I have a slight problem because there's nothing that I can cancel out right now. So the 2x plus 3 and the x plus 2 are definitely very different. But these two guys are not that much different, okay? What's the difference between these two parentheses here, the x minus 1 and the negative x plus 1? The major difference between them is pretty much they're just opposite signs. So we can do that trick that we did in number 3, where I pull out a negative, and the top line stays the same. And actually, this first parenthesis can stay the same too. But what we're going to change is we are going to change this parenthesis because that's where we pulled the negative out from. And remember, when we do that, we change all the signs. So whichever one you're trying to affect, when you pull out a negative, you change the signs of whichever one you're trying to change. So in this case, you're trying to change the negative x plus 1. So what I could do is I can pull out a negative and put it on the outside in the middle. The top line stays the same. This x plus 2 stays the same because that's not the one I was trying to change. And then we have this x minus 1 here. So now this is good to cancel now. cancel, cancel. So final answer for this guy is going to be 2x plus 3, x plus 2, and then I got a little minus sign there in the front. Okay. Now you guys work on the restrictions, and when you work on the restrictions, you don't have to worry about that negative in here. Take the restrictions from the first factoring thing you did it. So this guy's going to be the restrictions. You guys work on the restrictions, and then I will work them out here for you. You can check how you did. So the key thing I want to remind you guys here is you want to factor the top and the bottom the best you can. Maybe write some of the stuff down that I'm helping you with right now. So factor the top and bottom the most you can. If you're doing the box trick, be careful and make sure that the x squared, you put the x where it's supposed to go. So if the x squared is first, it goes first when you write it in the parenthesis when you factor. If the x squared is last, it's going to go in the back. Okay, if you have to pull out a negative somewhere, do that, and the only thing that's going to change the only thing it's going to change the signs of is the thing you want it to. So like in this number 4, the only thing I wanted to change the sign for is this negative x plus 1. So that's the only thing that's going to change signs there. So everything else stayed the same. The top line stayed the same. This x plus 2 stayed the same. So when you pull out a negative, you only change the sign for the one you're trying to change. For the restrictions, you want to go to the first thing you factored. So for the denominator, the first thing that I factored for this guy was the x plus 2, 1 minus x. I could go with this one too where I switch the letters, but don't get confused and don't use the one if you have to pull out a negative. Don't use that one to find the restrictions. Use it from one of the original factoring things you did to the denominator, okay? And the restrictions again are you just taking the denominator after you factored it and solving for whatever the variable is, okay? So those are a few things. Please rewind this part of the video so you can hear it and write it down. What are the things you need to be looking out for, because that's really going to help you. Again, knowing how to factor is really going to help you. So you guys got to be strong factoring students to be able to get with this stuff, or we're going to have a hard time for the rest of the year. So please write down your questions, message me, we can work on these, okay?